Okay, just continuing to talk about the school. Now, my grandfather was the principal. He did a lot of the grading and things. So, when they grade people, we have report cards and all kind of stuff to go through, and I'll show you. This gentleman here, you can see him. That is Dr. Richard Mayers. Remember, I talked about the dynamic duo, that power couple? That's Dr. Richard Mayers, and highly educated man from Barbados. From Barbados. And my aunt, Flora, who is my mom's namesake, she's named after Flora. They look a lot alike, too, I think. Um, she was his wife. That is Flora Mayers. She is his wife. Now, they were educators and both educated. This is the lady that I said graduated college at the age of 16. Now, that story is something I've always been told and always heard, that she graduated college at the age of 16. Now, where that happened, if it happened in the United States, if it happened abroad, I don't know. And nothing more than the fact that everybody really talked about her, that, she graduated college at this early age. Also, I remember hearing the stories about Dr. Mayers, Uncle Richard, as they would call him affectionately, but this is the power couple. It's so funny. He called her Mrs. Mayers and she called him Dr. Mayers. They were always formal, always formal. Um, and they had no children. I don't know if one goes with the other, but they had no children. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Mayers is, also is that he had a relationship with Marcus Garvey. Oh, also, he's a published author, and I have a copy of his book. He wrote a book called God Dealing with the Negro. So I'm also not the first published author in my family. So he wrote this book and published it through a publisher, no self-publishing. Um, and so I'm not sure where these two met, um, but somehow or another, through this relationship and these two, I call them the power couple of their day. The school was secured. My grandfather, my great grandfather, even my great grandmother taught in the school. I found one of her math books where she would have been teaching math to a class, and so these people, my relatives, came out of slavery and immediately, and I'm not so sure that they had not already, although it's hard for me to think how that would have happened, became quite educated. And these are some of the stories that I grew up with. I have more things to share, and I will continue sharing them with you guys. This project I'm doing is primarily for my children. My children know a lot of the stories. My nieces and nephews probably don't. And it's my way of taking a lot of these documents and photos out of the dark and bringing them to the light. Um, I handle them very gently, maybe too much, and I keep them very close because the level of privacy that my family always strived to have, I'm aware of, but I also am aware that I'm living in changing times and that that level of privacy may hinder a generation from knowing that there were Black people who did not live on welfare. There were Black people who, just coming out of slavery, became highly educated and passed on things that they knew to the next generation. And so I'm going to move forward uh, in giving out a lot of this information. Oh, let me share this too. This is my grandfather. Now, remember when I was reading the scroll and I said that my great grandmother, we weren't probably some of her favorite people. And that has a lot to do with this gentleman here and his relationship with my grandmother. Um, he fought in World War One and came home and married my grandmother. There were a huge difference in their age. Huge difference in their age. Also, they looked down on her because she literally was one of their servants. And her background was her mom was white and her father was Native American and Black from the Blackfoot family. His name was Pete Denham, and he was very dark, but with hair all the way down to his waist. He was a medicine man, but because of her birth, she could not stay with her parents, and there were other mitigating circumstances. And so she was more or less put into their care. I do have a document that my grandmother had my cousin write, and it's somewhat her story. And so as I chronicle this, I'm going to actually add that as well. But because of the nature of her birth, because her mother was white, um, and then he comes home from World War One, and they had pretty much grown up in the house together because they got her when she was young. Although she was young, she was a servant. She was forbidden to go to school, although they owned the school and she worked in the school and the house. She was forbidden to go to school. But this gentleman here, Dr. Richard Mayers from Barbados, drew the line with the rest of the family and insisted that she must learn to read the Bible. She must learn to read the Bible. So where other people were being educated in a great many things, um, she was only instructed in the reading of the Bible. So when I said my great grandmother was, we were not some of her favorite people. It was, oh, and then the other thing that I did read in the scroll as well, they got married in, I know it's 7 years, 1920 or whatever. Anyway, she divorced him. My grandmother eventually divorced Clarence Toole, and that was, you can imagine, kind of somewhat unheard of in that day and time. And there were a lot of little infighting and things. So the dynamics were really racial, class, and then to have her divorce their son, that was kind of problematic, and I'm sure hurtful too to my great grandmother. Um, See, when I say my family was very private, um, these are things that would have never been shared publicly during their time. Um, but I think it's relevant to today's time, and knowing knowing some of the details of one particular family through Black History Month. We always hear about civil rights icons. Well, this is pre civil rights. This is way before civil rights. Okay, so I'm going to move on.